The artificial sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Academy's cafeteria as Taiwan hunched over his nutrient tray, trying to make himself as small as possible. His crystalline body, once a brilliant display of blues and purples that would shimmer with every movement, had faded to a dull ashen gray. The 12-cycle-old crystallite kept his head down, focusing on carefully absorbing his lunch through his lower crystals while pretending not to hear the whispers around him. "Look at him, he's turning gray like a dying star," came a snicker from a group of plasmaform students floating nearby, their bodies rippling with cruel amusement. "I heard crystallites do that when they're defective," another voice added. No wonder his parents abandoned him. Taiwan's crystals dimmed even further at those words. He wanted to shout that his parents hadn't abandoned him. They had died in a mining accident while trying to provide for him. But he remained silent, just as he had for the past 3 cycles since the accident. At a nearby table, a group of vapoid children deliberately released puffs of acidic mist in his direction, knowing the chemical composition would make his outer layers itch uncomfortably. Taiwan shifted away, his movements stiff and uncertain. Teacher Lim, a tall Aquarian whose water-filled environmental suit gleamed under the cafeteria lights, noticed the interaction from her monitoring position. Her tentacles twisted in concern as she watched her once bright student shrink away from his peers. She remembered how Taiwan used to light up the classroom with his eager questions and insightful observations. His crystal formations would pulse with excitement whenever he solved a particularly challenging problem in quantum mathematics. Now, he barely spoke. His hand never raised in class anymore, and his last 3 assignments had been left incomplete. The bright student who once corrected his teacher's calculations was disappearing into himself, crystal by crystal. During the afternoon session of interstellar biology, Taiwan sat in the back corner, his usual spot these days. The teacher's words about cellular adaptation barely registered as he focused on maintaining his minimal energy signature, a defense mechanism his species used to avoid attention. "Taiwan," Teacher Pak called out, her gelatinous form shifting with concern. "Could you explain the difference between carbon-based and silicon-based life forms?" The classroom fell silent. A year ago, this would have been an easy question for him. Now, Taiwan's voice came out barely above a whisper. I don't know." Snickers erupted around the room. A mechanoid student whirred in artificial laughter, its optical sensors flashing mockingly. "He's probably too busy being sad about having no family," someone muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Teacher Pak's form rippled with disapproval, but before she could respond, the bell signaled the end of class. Taiwan was the first one out the door, his crystals nearly gray-black now. In the teacher's lounge later that day, the staff gathered to discuss their concerns. Teacher Lim's tentacles moved agitatedly as she spoke. His grades have dropped from top of the class to barely passing. "This can't continue." "The regulations are clear," Administrator Kang responded, his holographic form flickering with frustration. "We cannot interfere in personal matters beyond academic support. The Interstellar Education Treaty specifically prohibits cross-species emotional intervention." "But he's just a child," Teacher Pak protested, her gelatinous form quivering. "Surely there must be something we can do." "Without legal guardians to approve intervention, our hands are tied," Administrator Kang said. "The Crystallite Embassy has made it clear they have no resources for orphan children in off-world institutions." Meanwhile, Taiwan had found his way to his secret spot, a small maintenance alcove near the Academy's crystal garden. He pressed himself against the wall, letting his crystalline structure absorb the faint energy emissions from the power conduits behind it. It wasn't the same as the loving energy his parents used to share with him, but it was better than nothing. He pulled out a small hologram projector from his school bag. With trembling crystals, he activated it, and the image of his parents appeared. His father's deep blue crystals, proud and strong. His mother's purple formations, elegant and warm. The recording showed them at their last family gathering, their crystals glowing with joy as they performed the traditional energy-sharing dance of their people. A tear-like mineral formation rolled down his face, crystallizing before it hit the floor. He quickly deactivated the hologram as footsteps approached, not wanting anyone to see this moment of weakness. The other students already had enough reasons to tease him. As the artificial day cycle drew to a close, Taiwan made his way back to his small dormitory room. The space was bare except for his charging station and a few crystalline growth supplements the school provided. No family photos adorned the walls. No personal items cluttered the shelves. Even his school supplies were secondhand, provided by the Academy's assistance program. That night, as the station's lights dimmed to simulate evening, Taiwan lay in his charging station, his crystals pulsing weakly with the remnants of the day's absorbed energy. He thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days stretching ahead of him, each one promising more loneliness, more whispers, more reminders of what he had lost. Just before entering his rest cycle, he did what he did every night. He sent out a small pulse of energy into the void, the way his parents had taught him. It was an old crystallite tradition, a way of connecting with family across vast distances. He knew there would be no answer, but he couldn't stop hoping. Somewhere in the vast universe, there had to be someone who would understand him, someone who would see past his fading crystals and see him for who he really was. The lights went out completely, leaving only the faint glow of his dimmed crystalline body in the darkness. Tomorrow would be another day at the Galactic Academy, another day of trying to survive being the alien who had no one. The steady click of Dr. He-Jin Park's boots echoed through the polished corridors of Galactic Academy as she made her way to the Xenobiology Research Wing. Her arms were full of scanning equipment, and her dark hair was neatly tied back to keep it out of her way during her work. As Earth's leading xenobiologist, she had spent countless hours studying different alien species, but today something else caught her attention. In the corner of the main hall, a young crystallite student sat alone, his once bright crystal formations now a dull gray that barely reflected the overhead lights. He-Jin slowed her pace, watching as other students gave him a wide berth, some pointing and whispering as they passed. The sight stirred something in her memory, a feeling of being different, of being alone. She found herself touching the old locket that hung around her neck, a habit she'd developed over the years when something troubled her. Fascinating species, aren't they? Administrator Yoon appeared beside her, his facial tentacles moving gently in the air-conditioned breeze. The crystallites, I mean. Their biological structure is quite remarkable. He-Jin nodded, but her eyes remained on the young student. I studied their physiology before, but I've never seen one with such dim formations. Is he sick? Administrator Yoon's tentacles drooped noticeably. No, not physically. That's Taiwan. He lost his parents in the Centauri mining collapse last year. The crystal dimming is emotional. No other family? He-Jin asked, her hand still resting on her locket. None that came forward. The Crystallite Embassy said they lack resources for orphan children in off-world institutions. He's been here ever since. He-Jin watched as Taiwan gathered his things and hurried away from a group of laughing students. His movements were quick and nervous, like someone expecting to be hurt at any moment. She recognized those movements. She'd made them herself, once upon a time. During her research sessions that day, He-Jin found her attention constantly drawn to Taiwan. She observed how he sat alone in classes, how his crystal formations would dim even further when other students made comments. During the lunch period, she noticed he ate in a corner, trying to make himself as small as possible. Between her scheduled observations of various alien species, He-Jin found herself pulling up information about crystallite culture on her datapad. She read about their strong family bonds, how parents shared energy with their children, how their crystal formations would sync during family gatherings. The thought of a child from such a family-oriented species being alone made her heart ache. Later that afternoon, she met with Administrator Yoon in his office. The room was filled with artifacts from various species, but He-Jin barely noticed them. Tell me more about him, she said, sitting down across from the administrator's desk. Yoon's tentacles moved thoughtfully. He was one of our brightest students before the accident. His crystal formations used to light up the whole classroom when he got excited about learning. Now, he gestured helplessly. We try to help, but there are regulations about cross-species intervention. Hejin opened her locket, looking at the old photo inside. A small girl in a Seoul orphanage uniform, trying to smile for the camera. I understand more than you might think, she said quietly. She spent the rest of the day observing Taiwan more closely, under the pretense of studying crystallite behavior patterns. She noticed how he flinched at loud noises, how he kept to the shadows where his dimmed crystals wouldn't be as noticeable. During one observation, she saw him pull out a small hologram projector and look at what appeared to be family images before quickly hiding it away when others approached. That evening, as Hejin packed up her equipment, she found herself walking past the Academy's crystal garden. To her surprise, she saw Taiwan there, pressed against a wall near a power conduit. She realized he was trying to absorb energy from it, a poor substitute for the family energy sharing his species normally practiced. The sight made her pause. She remembered her own nights in the orphanage, clutching a worn photo of parents she couldn't remember, trying to feel some connection to them. Her hand went to her locket again, feeling its familiar shape. Back in her temporary quarters on the station, Hejin couldn't sleep. She spent hours reading about crystallite culture, about their family structures, about their needs. She read about cross-species adoption regulations, about the legal challenges, about the biological considerations. The more she read, the more determined she became. Just before she finally went to bed, she took out her locket one last time. The photo inside showed not just her childhood self, but also the woman who had eventually adopted her, the woman who had looked past all the barriers and regulations and had simply seen a child who needed love. Hejin made a decision that night. Tomorrow, she would begin asking questions about adoption procedures. It wouldn't be easy. There would be bureaucratic hurdles, biological challenges, and cultural barriers to overcome. But as she looked at her locket one final time before turning out the lights, she knew it was the right thing to do. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about the dim crystals of the lonely child in the hallway, and she wondered if they might shine again with the right kind of care. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important scientific discoveries weren't about biology or physics at all. They were about the heart and its capacity to bridge even the vast distances between the stars. The artificial sunlight streamed through the transparent panels of the hydroponics bay, creating rainbow patterns as it passed through the mist systems. Dr. Hejin Park had searched 3 levels of the academy before hearing the faint sound of crystal formations shifting between the rows of space wheat. She found Taiwan huddled in a corner, his crystalline body trying to absorb whatever stray energy the plants released during photosynthesis. Instead of approaching him directly, Hejin settled down a few meters away, pretending to be absorbed in her datapad. She could see him tense at her presence, his crystals dimming even further in an attempt to avoid notice. With deliberate slowness, she pulled out her lunchbox and opened it, letting the sharp, familiar aroma of kimchi fill the air. The scent seemed to catch Taiwan's attention. His crystal formations shifted slightly, turning toward her with curiosity. Hejin smiled to herself, remembering how her own mother had taught her that food was the universal language of comfort. "My mother taught me that food tastes better when shared," she said softly, not looking directly at him, "even if our biological systems are different." She placed a small portion of her lunch on a clean specimen dish and set it halfway between them. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, slowly, like a crystal formation growing in slow motion, Taiwan emerged from his hiding spot. His movements were cautious, ready to retreat at any sudden movement. In the direct light, Hejin could see a hint of his natural blue color trying to show through the grayness. "My maternal unit used to say something similar," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. The words seemed to surprise him, as if he hadn't meant to speak them aloud. Jin kept her movements calm and steady as she ate her own lunch. "Would you like to tell me about her?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle and neutral. Taiwan's crystals flickered with multiple emotions. She used to share energy with me during mealtimes. She said it made the nutrients absorb better. His voice grew quieter. She was always right about things like that. "That sounds wonderful," Jin said, noting how his crystals showed more blue when he spoke of happy memories. "In my culture, sharing food is also very important. It's how we show care for each other." Taiwan moved a little closer, his crystal formations catching the light in a way that made them almost sparkle. But I can't eat your food. Our systems are too different." Jin smiled warmly. "That's okay. Sometimes just sitting together is enough." She pulled out a small energy emitter from her research equipment. "Though, if you'd like, I brought something that might help. It's a basic energy supplement. Nothing like family sharing, but better than power conduits in the walls." Taiwan's crystals pulsed with surprise. You noticed that?" "I notice a lot of things," Jin said softly. "Like how brave you are, coming to school every day despite everything." The young crystallite's formations dimmed again. "I'm not brave. I hide all the time. Sometimes staying when you want to run away is the bravest thing of all," Jin said, touching her locket again. "I know something about that myself." Curiosity overcame caution as Taiwan noticed the gesture. "What's in your locket?" Jin opened it carefully, showing him the old photo. "This is me at the Seoul orphanage. And this is the woman who became my mother, even though we weren't related by blood." Taiwan's crystals shifted closer, showing more of their natural color as he looked at the picture. You were alone too." "I was," Jin admitted, "until someone chose to care about me. Someone who didn't care that we looked different or came from different backgrounds." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the soft hum of the hydroponic systems creating a peaceful backdrop. Taiwan gradually moved closer to the energy emitter, his crystals slowly absorbing its output. "Would you like to hear about the different plants they grow here?" Jin asked, noticing his interest in the surrounding greenery. "As a xenobiologist, I find their adaptations fascinating." For the first time in months, Taiwan's crystals showed a genuine flicker of enthusiasm. "Yes, please. I used to be good at biology." "Used to be?" Jin raised an eyebrow. "I think you still are. You just needed someone to talk to about it." As she explained about the modified wheat strains and their ability to grow in artificial gravity, she watched Taiwan's crystals gradually show more color. His questions, hesitant at first, became more confident as she encouraged his curiosity. When the lunch period ended, Taiwan seemed reluctant to leave. Could I come back tomorrow?" he asked, his crystals dimming slightly with uncertainty. "I'll be here," Jin promised. "Same time, same place, and I'll bring more energy supplements." She paused, then added gently, "And maybe you could tell me more about your maternal unit sayings." A small smile appeared in the pattern of his crystals. "I'd like that." As they parted ways, Jin watched him walk back to class with slightly straighter posture, his crystals retaining a hint of their natural blue. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sometimes, she thought, the biggest journeys began with the smallest steps, or in this case, with a shared lunch in a hydroponics bay. Director Song's holographic form cast a blue glow across the conference room as she looked down at the stack of documents Jin had prepared. The director's image flickered slightly, a sign of the long-distance transmission from Earth's central administration. "Dr. Park, I hope you understand the complexity of what you're proposing," Director Song said, her digital face showing clear concern. "Cross-species adoption has never been attempted with a crystallite. The physiological differences alone make this unprecedented." Jin stood straight, her hand steady as she pulled up her research findings on the room's display. "With respect, Director, love doesn't require biological compatibility. I spent weeks studying every aspect of crystallite physiology and culture. Look at these modifications I've designed for my apartment. The holographic displays show detailed plans, specialized energy emitters installed in every room, crystal growth supplements stored in climate-controlled cabinets, and a modified sleeping chamber that could maintain the precise temperature and humidity levels a young crystallite needed. I've even installed backup power systems, Heijin continued, flipping through the diagrams. If the main power fails, Taiwan will still have access to the energy he needs to thrive. Director Song's hologram crossed her arms. Dr. Park, your preparations are impressive, but this goes beyond physical accommodations. The psychological implications of a human raising the crystallite child. I've thought of that too, Heijin interrupted, pulling up another file. I've been working with Taiwan for the past month. His crystal formations have already shown improvement in color and vitality. Here are the readings. Meanwhile, in his temporary quarters, Taiwan sat on his charging station, running his crystalline fingers over the adoption documents Heijin had shown him earlier. His crystal formations flickered between bright blue hope and dim gray fear. He could still hardly believe this was real. The young crystallite remembered the first time Heijin had mentioned adoption. They had been in the hydroponics bay, their usual meeting spot, when she had carefully brought up the subject. His initial reaction had been disbelief, followed by a surge of emotion so strong his crystals had briefly glowed their original color. Back in the conference room, Director Song was reviewing the psychological assessments. The boy has shown improvement, true, but there are no precedents for this. The legal implications alone. I have those covered too, Heijin said, bringing up legal documents. I've consulted with 3 different interstellar law firms. There's nothing in any existing legislation that specifically prohibits cross-species adoption. In fact, the Galactic Children's Rights Act of 2157 supports my case. The director's hologram sighed. Dr. Park, your thoroughness is admirable, but you must understand our position. If anything were to go wrong, something is already wrong, Heijin said firmly, touching her locket. There's a child suffering right now because we're too afraid to try something new. I was an orphan too, director. I know what it's like to feel alone in the universe. In his room, Taiwan pulled out the small hologram projector containing his parents' images. He looked at their bright, healthy crystals, then at his own reflection in the metal wall. His formations had started to show more color lately, especially after his talks with Heijin. She had even learned to read his crystal patterns, just like his parents used to do. The conference room fell silent as Director Song studied the final set of documents. You've included statements from other crystallite adults supporting this adoption. Yes. Heijin nodded. 3 crystallite scientists I've worked with have reviewed my plans. They agree that while unusual, my preparations meet all the biological and cultural needs of a growing crystallite. The director's hologram looked thoughtful. And the boy himself, what does he want? Why don't you ask him? Heijin suggested, pressing a button on the console. The door slid open, and Taiwan entered, his crystals showing nervous blue-green patterns. Young one, Director Song addressed him directly. Do you understand what Dr. Park is proposing? Do you want this adoption? Taiwan's crystals pulsed with emotion as he spoke. Dr. Park, Heijin, she sees me, not just my species or my situation, but me. She learned our ways, our patterns. His voice caught, crystals brightening. She makes me feel like I belong somewhere again. Director Song's hologram watched as Heijin instinctively moved closer to Taiwan, her presence causing his crystal formations to steady and brighten. The director looked at her documents one final time, then at the unlikely pair before her. Dr. Park, this will not be easy. There will be challenges we haven't even anticipated yet. Are you absolutely certain about this? Heijin looked at Taiwan, then back at the director. Some things are worth any challenge, director. Some things are worth being the first. The director's hologram nodded slowly. Very well. I'll approve the preliminary application. But she held up a finger. You'll both be required to undergo regular check-ins and evaluations. This is uncharted territory for everyone involved. Taiwan's crystals burst into their brightest blue yet, while He-Jin blinked back tears of joy. They had done it. They had taken the first step toward becoming a real family. As they left the conference room together, Taiwan's crystals still glowing with happiness, He-Jin realized that sometimes the biggest scientific breakthrough wasn't about discovering something new in the universe. It was about discovering new ways to love what was already there. News of the unprecedented adoption spread through Galactic Academy like a solar flare. Taiwan tried to keep his crystal formations dim as he walked through the corridors, but it was hard to hide his growing happiness. For the first time since losing his parents, his natural blue color had started to return. Keita, a Nebulonian student whose gaseous form usually shifted between shades of green and purple, turned a dark, stormy color when he spotted Taiwan. His gaseous body rippled with malice as he floated closer, gathering a group of other students around him. "Look who it is," Keita's voice hissed through his vapor form. "The broken crystallite who thinks a human can be his parent. How pathetic." Taiwan's crystals dimmed slightly, but he kept walking. He remembered He-Jin's words about staying strong. Behind him, Keita's form expanded, blocking the corridor. "A human cannot raise a crystallite," Keita continued, his gaseous form swirling menacingly. "You'll never be normal. Do you think she can teach you proper energy sharing, or help you through your first crystal shedding?" Other students gathered to watch, their various biological forms creating a diverse audience for Keita's cruelty. Some looked uncomfortable, but none stepped forward to help. "She's learning," Taiwan said quietly, his crystals pulsing with a mix of fear and defiance. "She already knows how to read my patterns." Keita's laugh came out as a harsh whoosh of gas. "Oh, does she? Like this?" He suddenly released a burst of acidic vapor, making Taiwan's outer crystals sting. Just then, He-Jin rounded the corner. She took in the scene quickly, her years of xenobiological research letting her read the situation instantly. Without hesitation, she stepped between Taiwan and Keita. "Fascinating display of Nebulonian aggression behavior," she said calmly, pulling out her datapad. "I'd love to document this for my research on juvenile xenosocial interactions. Keita, would you mind stating your name for the record?" Keita's gaseous form wavered uncertainly. What? Oh, and that acidic vapor release. Very interesting. The Nebulonian embassy will surely want to review this footage, given their recent push for better representation in interspecies institutions." Keita's form rapidly shifted to a pale, nervous yellow. He quickly floated away, his gathered audience dispersing with him. He-Jin turned to Taiwan, her eyes expertly reading his crystal patterns. "You're in pain," she said, noticing the slight discoloration, where Keita's vapor had made contact. "It's nothing." Taiwan tried to dim his crystals to hide the damage, but He-Jin was already pulling out a specialized neutralizing spray she'd started carrying for exactly this situation. "Let me help," she said softly, applying the spray with practiced care. "You don't have to hide your pain from me. Remember what we talked about." Taiwan's crystals flickered with emotion. Family shares everything, both joy and pain. As they walked to class together, other students watched with growing curiosity. They saw how He-Jin adjusted her walking pace to match Taiwan's crystal energy cycles, how she instinctively positioned herself to shield him from harsh light sources that could overwhelm his sensors. In class, Keita and his friends tried to make up for their corridor defeat with whispered comments and small acts of meanness, but each time, He-Jin was there, using her scientific knowledge and maternal instincts in perfect combination. When someone accidentally increased the room's temperature to uncomfortable levels for crystallite biology, He-Jin calmly explained to the teacher how different species required different environmental conditions, leading to new classroom protocols that helped everyone. During lunch, When some students tried to exclude Taiwan from their study group, He-Jin hosted an open session on interspecies communication in the library. Students who came to mock stayed to learn, fascinated by her deep understanding of their various biological needs. The challenges didn't stop at school. Every day brought new bureaucratic obstacles. Forms that didn't have spaces for crystalline signatures, housing regulations that hadn't considered mineral-based life forms, insurance policies that didn't know how to categorize their unique family situation. But He-Jin met each challenge with the same determination she brought to her research. She learned to help Taiwan maintain his crystal clarity during stressful meetings. She modified human parenting techniques to account for his unique needs. When he had nightmares that made his crystals flash with remembered fear, she learned to share calming energy frequencies that helped him feel safe again. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Other students started to notice how Taiwan's crystals grew brighter each day. They saw how he began to participate in class again, his crystal formations glowing with renewed confidence. Some even began to ask questions about human crystallite interaction, genuinely curious about this new kind of family. One afternoon, as He-Jin helped Taiwan with his homework, Ki-Ta floated by their table in the library. His gaseous form had shifted to a more subdued color. I was wrong," he said quietly, his vapor form swirling with what seemed like embarrassment. "About humans not being able to raise a crystallite. You're doing it well." Taiwan's crystals brightened with surprise, while He-Jin smiled. "Thank you, Ki-Ta. Would you like to join our study group? We're reviewing xenobiology, and a Nebulonian perspective would be valuable." That evening, as He-Jin helped Taiwan with his daily crystal maintenance, his formations glowed with contentment. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked. "That showing them was better than telling them." He-Jin smiled, carefully polishing each crystal surface. Sometimes the best way to change minds is to open hearts first, even gas-based ones. Taiwan's crystals sparkled with laughter, the sound echoing through their home like music, the sound of a family that had fought for their right to exist and won. The morning light filtered through the specially installed spectrum panels in He-Jin's apartment, casting rainbow patterns that made Taiwan's crystals sparkle with joy. It had taken weeks to get the lighting exactly right, but seeing his formations glow with their natural blue made every adjustment worthwhile. He-Jin stood in their modified kitchen, carefully mixing mineral supplements into Taiwan's morning nutrient solution. She had memorized the exact proportions that made his crystals shine the brightest, adding a pinch of rare earth elements that she special ordered from off-world suppliers. "Good morning." Taiwan emerged from his charging chamber, his crystals still slightly dim from sleep. "Is that copper I smell?" "Just a trace amount." He-Jin smiled, noting how his formations perked up at the scent. "I found a new supplier who can get the pure stuff. Want to try it?" Taiwan's crystals pulsed with excitement as he absorbed the solution. Almost immediately, his formations began to glow brighter. "It's perfect, just like how Mother used to make it." He-Jin's heart warmed at his words. It had taken months of trial and error to get the mixture right, but moments like this made it all worthwhile. As they prepared for their day, soft classical music played through the apartment sound system. Bach's cello suite No. 1 filled the air, and Taiwan's crystals began to resonate with the deep vibrations. "The vibrations," he explained, swaying slightly with the music, "they feel like home. Like when my family would sing together during energy sharing." His crystals pulsed in time with the music, creating their own light show. He-Jin watched in fascination as his crystal formations created patterns she'd never seen before. "Would you teach me about crystal-like music?" she asked. "I'd love to learn your songs." Taiwan's crystals brightened further. "Really? But humans can't produce crystal resonance." "We can make instruments that do," He-Jin said, pulling out a device she'd been working on. "I've been studying frequency patterns that match crystallite harmonics." Together, they spent the morning exploring music from both their cultures. He-Jin learned how crystallite songs were more than just sound. They were patterns of light and energy that told stories across generations. Taiwan discovered how human music could make him feel emotions he thought he'd lost with his parents. As evening approached, they moved to their favorite spot, the apartment's small observatory nook. He-Jin had installed a powerful telescope there, along with star charts from both Earth and Taiwan's homeworld. "Show me your stars again," she said, adjusting the telescope. "I want to learn all your constellations." Taiwan's crystals glowed softly as he pointed out patterns in the night sky. "See those 3 bright stars? On my world, we call them the Crystal Guardians. They watch over young ones during their first growth cycle. On Earth, those same stars are part of what we call Orion's Belt," He-Jin explained. "It's part of a story about a great hunter. They spent hours mapping the stars, blending their cultural stories into new tales that belonged uniquely to them. When they found stars that hadn't been named in either culture, they created their own names, building a private mythology that bridged their 2 worlds." Later that night, as they shared energy, He-Jin through her specially designed emitter, and Taiwan through his crystal formations, they talked about their growing bond. "I was scared at first," Taiwan admitted, his crystals showing hints of their old uncertainty. "I thought no one could ever understand me like my first family did." He-Jin adjusted the emitter's frequency to match his crystal patterns. "Different doesn't always mean less," she said softly. "Sometimes it just means new." They had created their own rituals too. Every evening, they would share their day's experiences. He-Jin through words, Taiwan through crystal patterns that He-Jin was learning to read as fluently as any crystallite parent. They celebrated both Earth holidays and crystallite energy cycles, creating hybrid celebrations that honored both their cultures. One particularly meaningful tradition they developed was their weekly growth documentation. He-Jin would take detailed readings of Taiwan's crystal patterns, not just for scientific records, but to create a family album of his development. They would compare the readings to old holos of his parents, noting how he was growing into his own unique pattern while still carrying echoes of his first family. "You're not replacing them," He-Jin had assured him one night when his crystals showed signs of guilt at his happiness. "You're expanding your family circle. Your first parents will always be part of who you are." As they finished their evening routine, Taiwan's crystals glowed with a deep, contented blue. "He-Jin," he asked hesitantly, "is it okay if I start calling you Mom?" He-Jin felt tears well up in her eyes as she nodded. "I would be honored," she whispered. Taiwan's crystals burst into their brightest glow yet, creating patterns that danced across the walls. Without words, they both understood that they had crossed an important threshold. They weren't just an experiment in cross-species adoption anymore. They were simply family, in all the ways that mattered. As they said goodnight, Taiwan's crystals pulsed with a pattern He-Jin had learned meant love. She responded with the gentle touch she knew he could feel through his formations, their different ways of showing affection blending into something uniquely their own. In the quiet of their home, under lights that mimicked distant stars, 2 beings from different worlds had found their way to becoming something unprecedented in the galaxy, a family bound not by biology, but by choice, understanding, and love. The graduation hall of Galactic Academy sparkled with decorations from 100 different worlds, but none shone brighter than Taiwan's crystal formations as he took his place at the podium. His blue glow illuminated the entire stage, reflecting off the ceremonial medals and creating dancing patterns across the walls. In the front row, He-Jin sat with tears in her eyes, her hand clasping the locket that now contained 2 photos, her younger self and a recent image of Taiwan, his crystals radiant with happiness. Next to her, Ki-Te's gaseous form swirled with anticipation, his previous hostility long transformed into genuine friendship. 5 years had passed since that first meeting in the hydroponics bay. 5 years of challenges, growth, and unexpected joys that had changed not just their lives, but the entire Academy's understanding of family. Distinguished guests, honored faculty, fellow graduates, Ta-1 began, speaking first in perfect Korean, then in standard Galactic. His crystal formations pulsed with each word, creating a mesmerizing light show that held the audience spellbound. Among the gathered crowd, several crystallite diplomats watched with undisguised amazement. They had come skeptical of a human-raised crystallite, but Ta-1's perfectly maintained formations and impressive academic achievements had silenced their doubts. When I first came to this academy, I was lost, Ta-1 continued, his crystals briefly dimming at the memory before brightening again. I thought being different meant being alone. I thought family could only exist within the same species. Hejin watched as her son's crystals shifted through patterns she had learned to read as clearly as any facial expression. Pride, joy, and love radiated from every facet. But family, he said, looking directly at Hejin, isn't about matching DNA or having the same biological structure. It's about the light we create together. It's about learning new ways to share energy, new ways to understand each other, new ways to love. In the audience, other students nodded. Many of them had watched Ta-1 and Hejin's journey from skepticism to acceptance to admiration. They had seen how Hejin learned to read crystal patterns, how Ta-1 embraced human customs, how they created something entirely new together. My mother, my human mother, taught me that science isn't just about understanding differences. Ta-1's crystals pulsed with emotion. It's about building bridges across those differences. She proved that love doesn't need biological compatibility to thrive. Kita's gaseous form rippled with agreement, remembering how his own prejudices had been transformed through watching their family grow. Other former bullies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but their expressions showed respect rather than mockery. As Ta-1 concluded his speech, his crystals reached their peak brilliance, filling the hall with blue light that seemed to touch every being present. The applause that followed wasn't just for his academic achievements or his eloquent words. It was for every being who had ever felt different, every family that didn't fit the standard definition, every bridge built across the vast distances between stars. After the ceremony, well-wishers from various species surrounded them. Young crystallites asked Hejin about human culture, while human students questioned Ta-1 about crystal formations. Their family had become a symbol of possibility. That evening, mother and son sat on their balcony in Seoul, sharing a meal that symbolized their blended life. Hejin enjoyed her kimchi while Ta-1 absorbed specialized nutrients that made his crystals shimmer. Above them, shooting stars streaked across the sky. "Remember when you first taught me Earth constellations?" Ta-1 asked, his crystals creating gentle patterns in the darkness. "And you showed me how to see the crystal guardians." Hejin smiled. "Now we have our own stories for every star." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky. A group of students passed on the street below, representing various species all studying at Earth universities. Their presence, once unusual, had become common after Ta-1 and Hejin's success story spread. "The academy asked me to teach a course," Hejin mentioned casually, "about cross-species family dynamics." Ta-1's crystals brightened with excitement. "Really? That's wonderful. Will you tell our story?" "Our story, and hopefully help create many more," Hejin replied. "The Galactic Council is using our case to revise adoption regulations across all species." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Kita, who had become a regular part of their extended family. His gaseous form appeared on the holographic projector, swirling with happy colors as he shared news about his own plans to study human culture. As night deepened, Ta-1's crystals began to pulse with the special pattern that meant contentment. Hejin recognized it immediately. It was the same pattern she had first noticed years ago, when he finally began to feel at home. "Thank you," he said suddenly, his crystals creating intricate patterns of gratitude. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for making me shine again." Hejin reached out to touch his crystalline surface, feeling the warm energy that pulsed beneath. "Thank you for teaching me that family is something we create together, one light at a time." Above them, the stars continued their eternal dance, witnesses to a love that had crossed the boundaries of species, space, and understanding. In their home, human and crystallite, mother and son, they had created their own constellation, a new pattern of family that would light the way for others to follow.